Has anybody heard from Dawn by any chance?
Not heard from Dawn.
Dawn's looking for parking? Okay. What's that, Melanie?
You can stay in the mayor's chair. You can stay in the mayor's chair.
I get to sit next to Mary Ann?
Yeah.
All right.
I'll do that. And we leave this one to Dawn.
Perfect.
Hello, Melanie.
Oh.
There he is.
Are you competing
Hi,
with
Dawn.
Dawn?
Come on in. We got a chair all warmed up for you right here in the middle.
Hi, Dawn.
This is Mary Ann. You're right there in the middle, Dawn.
I didn't want the chair.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. It is now 9:31, so we can go ahead and get started. If the steering committee members, if you just make sure if I didn't get to your microphone, turn on your button. I'll get Mary Ann's here for. Is the red light on?
Nope.
Huh? Yeah, it is. There we go. Okay, so get your microphones on because we're broadcasting obviously in the room, and we're on some folks joining us via Zoom. But good morning. I don't have a lot of announcements for you. We have the agenda in front of you. For those in the audience, the materials that the steering committee is going to go through today are up here on the front table. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. With that, we'll go to the very first item on the agenda. Actually, I guess you should see, do any of the steering committee members have announcements that they'd like to share with the group? Take that as a no. I want to also introduce Brian Pierrick, who's sitting with us here at the dais. He's the city attorney. Is going to help us with item number 3 on our agenda today, which is the Brown Act training, and you'll get to meet him. So with that, we'll open it, as we always do, for public comments. Anything you all would like to talk about before the meeting gets started, you'll have a chance to make a comment at the very end of the meeting as well, like we typically do. So please feel free if anyone in the room would like to come up, and then we'll get over to the Zoom.
Boy, it's great to see you in officialdom here like that. Good morning, I'm Ken White, and I'm going to pass something out to you, and if I could do that now, so you know what I'm talking about.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The first page is you can rip off and throw away. The only important statement is the bottom of that first page, and that's where sometimes things in the past give us good answers for the decisions we make today. You look at the past. You can throw that away if you like. The second page is a quote from the 88 General Plan, which I think is probably one of the most definitive descriptions of what type of architecture we want to have in the city. The third is a booklet that some of you have. It was printed up for the 100th anniversary of the city birthday, and they happen to print quite a few of them. If you have one of those, would you please give it to your neighbor or somebody who's a second homeowner that maybe would benefit from that? If you need more, let me know because we got a ton of them left. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. And to those on Zoom, I see a couple comments. There was no presentation that was put up. Former Mayor Ken White, just came up and handed the steering committee some hard copy materials, which we'll scan and we'll put those up in the folder that has all the steering committee information. But this was just something that was handed in person, so there was no presentation that went up on the screen for those that were asking. Anyone else in the room? Carol?
Yes, thank you. The Carmel Preservation Association was planning on doing a short presentation to you today, but on rethinking, we thought it might be best to use the time later at your next meeting after we had a chance to make the changes that we'd like to see to the design guidelines and go over them with you and explain to you why we think that should happen. So that's just updating you on that progress. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? I see Neil's making a move.
Got to
to say something, don't I? I'll try and keep this brief. Just wanted to mention that I'm going to try and begin to bring educational materials about modern architecture at this phase of public talking and so on and so forth. Some of the references of books and articles that are out there that you may be interested in. Why you hate contemporary architecture? Why do we love old buildings so much? Modern architectural features, can they cause feng shui problems? Why art became ugly? King Charles III's vendetta against modern architecture. Here's a classic book, The Failure of Modern Architecture. I'm only bringing this up so that we get out of the idea that it's just a bunch of old people in Carmel that don't like modern style architecture, and we can begin to look at it from a professional level and from the level of writing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil. Ian?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ian Martin. I'm a Carmel-by-the-Sea resident. I was born here, and I'm a former planning commissioner. As I think all of you now have, you have my a photographic survey of roughly 10% of the village's houses. And I've got another 100 or so photographs to contribute to that. So right now I'm up to about 400 individual single-family homes throughout the village of all manner of different architectural styles. And it really clearly demonstrates the wonderful diversity of architectural expressions we have in the community. So in collecting these 400 homes with my phone camera, the thing that really came home to me is that it's really not about individual architectural styles. We have magnificent examples of historic architectural styles, of course. We also have magnificent examples of modern architecture, contemporary architecture, and we also have terrible examples of modern architecture and contemporary architecture. But far and away, the worst offenders are houses that are built in a historic style. So really, it's not about individual architectural styles. It's really about the qualities, underlying qualities of any given building that make a house or a building appropriate to this village or inappropriate to this village. It's the massing, it's the scale, it's the choice of materials, the colors, how the building fits in with the forested nature of our community that determines whether or not a building is a true Carmel-by-the-Sea building or whether it sticks out like a sore thumb. So this is no news, of course, to Nori Winter, and it's no news, I believe, to all of you either. So please, stay the course and focus on what the qualities are that make a Carmel building and not ban a whole class of architecture. Carmel-by-the-Sea is a place that is founded for unconventional people, by unconventional people, and to expect that these kinds of people are going to live in conventional houses dictated to by people who say you cannot explore what it means today to live in a house that addresses modern ideas, contemporary ideas about what it is to subordinate to nature. That's completely not this village. This village is a place of free expression, and that free expression should continue unfettered and be expressed appropriately by the design guidelines through the style of houses that are created here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Anyone else in the room? Yeah, come on up.
Hi, my name is Susan Manchester. I've been a resident of Carmel for 50 years. I worked as an architectural draftswoman in San Francisco in the day when there weren't any, and also here in Carmel for Will Shaw. I'm married to an architect. I was married to an architect before that. So I know architecture, and I couldn't agree with Ian more. He has said it so eloquently that I couldn't possibly say anything better, but I just wanted to say that, you know, the idea of censoring, a blanket censoring of a certain kind of architecture as opposed to another kind of architecture is completely ridiculous to me. It seems to me that there's an architectural review committee, either was or should be, and again, each design should be judged for its own merit, and basically you can't really legislate taste. You have to be open, you have to be rational, and you have to, as Ian said, you have to sort of try to relate to the existence of a combination of architecture. And bad architectures, as a friend of mine just said, bad architects make bad architecture. So it makes it kind of simple when you're looking at the work. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? Yeah, please come on up.
Good morning, I'm David O'Neill. I'm a newbie, and I just wanted to thank everybody who's invested in this place and helped design it, because it's an amazing place to come and to visit and to live. I lived in France for several years. We restored a chateau there, and while we were there, we helped the village bring it back to life and revitalize some of its older buildings and give it new life and help modernize it and stuff. And one of the examples that we used was Carmel. We showed them what an amazing way you can redevelop, continue to develop, and make a wonderful place historical and yet livable and modern in its ways that it needs to be. And I really congratulate everybody on doing that. The one thing that I would just like to encourage is to really think about not just about freedom of personal expression, but the expression of the city as a whole. What does the city as a whole want to express to the world? It has been expressing a traditional and charming atmosphere that everybody comes and wants to see. There are wonderful examples of modern architecture, which I personally love. But do we want that to proliferate here? Do we want that to be what we're known for? And that's just a question that I asked you to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? I think that was actually everybody, so that's great. Thank you. So we'll look at Zoom now. Is anybody on the Zoom call, would they like to make a public comment?
This is David DiGirolamo.
Hi, David.
If
Go
I
ahead.
can make a comment.
Please.
So I live in Henry Hill's personal residence. It's a modernist building from the early 60s, and it's historic. We spent a lot of time and effort to restore it. It's been part of Carmel since 1961, as are other contemporary homes from that time. And they're representative of the Central Coast's own unique take on modernist architecture. People study these in school. Last month, I had 25 architects from France come to see this home, amongst others on the Monterey Peninsula. And so I'd just like to point out to folks that this is actually our architecture. It's historically important. And so where I completely agree with folks earlier saying that the houses have to reflect Carmel and represent the village and so on, and also our forest, and our village in the forest. I also think people have to keep in mind that we have our own architecture. This isn't from somewhere else. This is our own. And I would hate to see Carmel stop participating in the evolution of California's own brand of architecture. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Anyone else on Zoom who'd like to make a comment? Please raise your hand or just unmute yourself. That's fine too. Okay, I think that might be it for Zoom then. So go ahead and close that section of the agenda, public comment, and then we will bring it back to our city attorney for a brief Brown Act training.
Brian, before you get started, I'd like to address the committee for a moment. We're about 20% into the meeting, and we have a time limit. And I think most of the audience is here for items 6 through 8. So I would suggest that we ask Brian to hold, we move his item to the end of the agenda, and we take care of those matters that the public's here for, and then go to the training session.
I'd agree with that.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
that's good.
Brian, can you make that work? I know Brian was here and has some other things, but we'll see. Brian, can you make that work? Maybe hang out for an hour, or if you want to go next door, we can come and get you.
Yeah, I can do that. Why don't you text me when you need me?
Okay, can do.
Thanks, Brian.
Sure.
All right. So it sounds like Doug and the committee, you guys want to skip 4 and 5 as well then?
Well, I think Carol took 5 off the agenda.
Okay, so we have to, it's our agenda, so we have to do something on it. So
Okay,
we want to,
well,
if we want to,
I move that we continue item 5 until such time as the Preservation Association is ready to make its presentation.
Second.
Do we mean item 4?
5.
Or what?
I seconded.
Okay, yeah. Would-
Second.
Yeah. So it seems like everyone's in agreement. So you want to all start with item number 6 then?
No, item number 4.
Item number 4. Okay, so you
I
want to do
move-
4 then?
I move that Victoria Beach be named chair of the steering committee.
Second. I seconded.
Okay.
Aye.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, I mean, the way this works, I mean, it's really just, we don't have to necessarily vote
Aye.
on it. Yeah, it sounds like everyone's in favor of that. Okay.
She's got a mean kick.
I do? Yeah, right. Or should in a few months, anyway.
I'd like to nominate Doug Schmitz for vice chair.
I'll second that. Are you willing, Doug?
Yep.
Are you accepting?
Thank you.
Good.
Other committee members are on board with that as well, sounds like? Okay. And then the other part of the agenda item is to possibly discuss any other organizational structure matters of the steering committee. Is there any committee members that want to talk about that?
Well, so I think that if I'm to be the chair, which somebody had hinted to me earlier, I thought of a few things we probably ought to settle with respect to organization. The default for most committees in America is to just use Robert's Rules of Order if we ever need them. They make special allowances for small groups, and I imagine that we can follow those rules without really changing the way we've been interacting with each other so far. They have loose discussion protocols and loose agreement protocols, just like we've been doing all along. I think one of the benefits of Robert Rules is that it will hopefully discipline us to put our discussions into action items when we conclude those discussion moments, which we, I think, are guilty of being too loose about, as are most, I think, committees all over the country. So that would be a proposal I'd have if there's general consent to that.
Yes.
Yeah? Nods
Yes.
all around? Okay. No objections to that, so that's an action item. I think we should discuss meeting type and frequency and attendance and noticing and whether we want to do it in person or in Zoom. So does anyone have any comments about that?
I think we should continue to have meetings as we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should have an increased number of meetings.
Mm-hmm.
I think things are moving very, very rapidly, and I think we need to slow down and review everything and be very careful about what we're doing, because this is going to be with the city for quite a while, and I think the steering committee's put in an awful lot of time and energy into this, and is so supportive of it that I think that our comments and insights need to be thoroughly represented in this document. And that's all I have to say. I wait to hear from the rest of you.
What do folks think about, so Melanie's proposing increased frequency of meetings. What do folks think about Zoom versus in-person as maybe a way to accommodate that increase? And I don't even know yet what we're talking about in terms of an increase, but do people have strong feelings about in-person versus Zoom?
What, you just, I know, studied the Robert's Rules of Order or had a refresher on it.
Yeah.
What is the noticing requiment?
Well, that's a Brown Act, but keep going.
Yeah,
Right.
sorry. Yeah, so these loose groups you were loose group discussions you were describing, they still fall under the Brown Act, right?
Yeah.
So what is I don't know what the time of noticing is. So the frequency, is very much determined by the public.
I believe in
Noticing.
the lawyer's
It's
not here,
72
but
hours.
It's 72 hours, yeah, it's not that long.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then that would be possible if you wanted
Yeah.
a more spontaneous.
Right, true. It could
Meetings.
be spontaneous, that's true.
Any other suggestions for frequency of meetings? Any proposals for a rough, and again, it could be infinitely revised, I imagine. We don't have to stick to it, but we could have a rough idea of how often we want to meet.
Can I respond?
Sure.
Yeah, I really think that having
Melanie,
our
can you
meetings-
speak into the microphone a little bit so
Yeah,
people can
yeah.
hear you on Zoom?
I really think that, number one, we should start going to a weekly meeting to get some of these things taken care of that are, this whole process is going to the Planning Commission, going to the council. We haven't even reviewed the document that went to the Planning Commission and discussed it. And I have some serious notes on that, extensive notes on that. And we need to get together and go over what has been passed out already, and if it's an accurate reflection of what we have discussed and reached consensus on here. And also CPA wants to make a presentation. I think we need to get that on the docket as soon as possible. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I would hope that you'd be able to do in-person meetings here on a weekly basis for a little while to get ourselves where we want to be, where we want the committee to be. And so I would hope, I think that our personal interaction, like when we did the strategy plan in the first place, worked really well because we were all here, basically. You were here, but you were here by Zoom. And it makes a huge difference. It also makes a difference that we have the public here to talk to us. So there's an interchange of ideas and concerns and so forth. So I don't know, that's just the pitch that I would make.
So you have two items in there that I'm hearing. One is the frequency, which you'd like to, at least for the short term, go to weekly, and you prefer in person. So can others weigh in on that, weekly and in person versus Zoom?
I think Mary Ann's the key to this.
Yeah. Marion,
That's
how
a tall
is that
order.
too much?
Let me just,
She's getting out her
I
book.
don't know that I want to do that right here this moment, but for me, once a week, a half a day is, if you want to discuss, let me just see whether that's realistic.
Yeah. And that's just a suggestion on the table, so we could throw out bi-weekly. Go ahead, Don.
For meetings as frequently as we think they're necessary and productive. I wouldn't want to limit it to exactly every week, but up to once a week, yes.
I mean, what we could do, Marianne, is if that schedule doesn't automatically seem upsetting in concept, we could simply see if around that amount of time we can find spots in your schedule that fit.
I can just send you
Okay.
what is possible, and then if you can organize around it.
Okay.
And then maybe we want to consider, if we meet that frequent, do we need a whole morning, or can we start earlier, for example? That would help. Like, didn't we start much earlier before?
We started once at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a
That's
huge
better.
help. 8 to 11 is a lot more doable than
Sure.
the whole morning.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
And then I think the only reason I brought up Zoom has to do a little bit more with just the city hall arrangement and who else might be here, where we would meet, the imposition on staff to set up or to be open or whatever it is. That's the only reason it occurred to me that we might need to do Zoom just to alleviate that those logistics.
is this the only public space we have access to? If we have a public meeting?
Yeah, so that's a great question. This is the only space we have set up with the capabilities of hosting a hybrid meeting like this.
I see, okay.
Unless we were to pay every week a couple $1,000s to have Sunset Center set up, which the city's not going to do.
So Zoom is cheap, and it's easy. Again, I don't want to advocate for it. I'm totally fine to limp over here. But I'm thinking about maybe if we are meeting very frequently, it might end up being tough to set up, but I don't know the ins and outs of that. I also think it begs the question of staff time in general. I'm personally in favor of having as many meetings as we all want to have. I just want to make sure that we somehow figure out what works for staff, whether we want to just report out to staff, for example, so that they don't have to sit through more meetings than they have planned for. Again, whether Zoom is better for them to Zoom in on, for example. So I don't know if Brandon,
Maybe
do you
I was
wanna-
kind of waiting for you all to talk, but if now's an appropriate time, Madam Chair, for me to speak to the staff a little bit, that would
Yeah,
be,
so
that would be nice.
that's, I think those were, yeah, we've talked about, and again, I think just on the matter of attendance, I think, again, if you're meeting more frequently, obviously all 5 people should try to be available, but if one person can't be, that's happened before, so not the end of the world. Okay, Brandon, tell us about the logistics of what everyone's discussing here.
Yeah, so I guess I was going to make the pitch for, weekly is going to be a burden on staff, and I think that, staff needs to be involved in these meetings. The committee was set up by the council to advise staff and orienter and be the representative for the public, so it's an interaction with staff and the steering committee. It's not necessarily a committee, I think, that was intended to just meet on its own. Staff should be involved. So weekly will be difficult for staff. And I did hear a couple of the committee members say as needed. So I don't know if the committee feels that there's work that can be done every single week on this or not, or if it's just more frequently than every month that we set up when we started this together about 7 months ago. That was the original plan, was meeting once a month. So I guess I'll just offer that every week is difficult. Please bear in mind that me and my staff also support the Historic Resources Board, Planning Commission, City Council, and all the other work that we're doing here. So I would just ask the committee to consider that when we're talking about weekly meetings.
Well, I think that right now there are a number of things. Right now there are a number of things that the group feels that we need to discuss in more depth, and it's just not feasible to have to do an agenda like we would like to do, and have enough time, for instance, for a CPA presentation, for going over the strategy plan that's been revised, and those kinds of things. We don't have to have it every week, but we should say that we decide whether we want a weekly meeting till we can catch up, or go weekly for maybe, a month, or whatever. We should gear it to what our workload is and what our concerns are. So, I mean, we don't have to do it every week. That's not my implication.
You're saying up to every week.
Sure,
As-
well,
as-
just
as-
as-
And that's what Dawn
yeah.
said, as frequently as.
Perhaps I could offer.
As we need it, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps I could offer a suggestion, because most of the agenda items that are on today came at a suggestion of a steering committee member, which is great. So perhaps one thing we could get out of today is, I just heard you say that there's several items that the committee feels that need to be on an agenda. Perhaps we could actually create the list of things that the committee feels they need to be caught up on, and then we can determine how best to address that. If it's like you suggested, a week of monthly, or a month of weekly meetings, or if maybe once we get it on a list, we realize that we can do it in two meetings in a month. But I think if we maybe focus on developing that list of things that the committee feels needs to be caught up on, that might advise us a little bit on how to address it.
So that's item 8. I think we're going to probably have to reserve some time for that, a good chunk of time, so that's good to remind us of that. It seems, I'll just comment on, again, the staff time issue. I think that there is a model here that we are not necessarily considering yet, which is that the group, I think, I'm starting to understand, tell me if you disagree with this interpretation, group, would like to hash through some things as a group. That doesn't necessarily need to be done with staff participation in the moment, as long as that staff is looped in, reported out to, informed, collaborated with in the formation of the meeting and the report out of the meeting. In other words, I don't think the intention, but please, again, everybody correct me if I'm capturing this wrong, is to create more logistical work for the staff. It's simply to have free time that is not burdensome to the staff to come to mutual decisions about what the direction the steering committee wants to take. Obviously, the members of the committee, can decide when they want to meet. That's what a committee is about. So does that correctly capture what people are saying, or do you feel as though staff needs to be present and monitoring or participate in every item as we have loose workshop type discussions? What reactions to that? Marianne was shaking her head or nodding her head.
Yeah, no, I agree that there's stuff to be worked out, as a committee.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'll add just for some color there. So when this committee gets together, staff still does have to prepare an agenda, do the noticing, and all that. So the committee can't meet without some staff work going into that. So I just want to make that clear, which we're fine to support. I mean, if this committee decides that's what we're going to do. I will say for me personally, when we started this endeavor 8 months ago, I took direction from City Council, who's my ultimate boss, that staff is supposed to be involved in these meetings. So I would, if you decide, as frequently as you decide to meet, I will be here.
Okay, great.
I mean, that's why I just would ask for some consideration of how frequently, because I do feel the City Council has directed me to be part of these meetings. Okay. So I do need to be here.
So
in
that
regards to the
go ahead.
in regards to the agenda, though,
that was my next.
I think we should participate in creating the agenda, right? So that we actually can talk about the stuff that we need.
Because it has to, whatever you talk about has to be on agenda. You can't talk about things that are not on that agenda previously, which is where I was going with the, staff. Either way, even if I said I wasn't going to come, staff is still involved in those meetings. We have to prepare the agenda for you. We have to post it. It has to be out 72 hours, 3 conspicuous places around town, in constant contact, all that good stuff. So there's still work to be done for every time that this body meets.
So let me propose, unless there are objections to this, that for at least these workshop type meetings that are more frequent, that the committee itself craft the agenda and simply give it to either your staff, Brandon, or some other member of the City Hall to post online. It does not need to involve staff groundwork for that, especially if these are discussion items that the committee has on their minds. I would also, perhaps, unless there are objections to this, suggest that since, again, the committee seems to be needing more time to hash through some things as a group, that we have a sort of standing agenda item that is somewhere along the lines of general discussion about the design guidelines, related documents and procedures, and discussion and possible action. That's something like that. And then, of course, below that, any other specific things that we've decided that we want to talk about for sure at that meeting, or that staff definitely needs covered at that meeting. That seems to me would keep us Brown Act compliant. Does anyone have any objections to that suggestion?
That's fine.
Don, Melanie? Okay.
That may be a good question then to vet when the attorney is present again.
Yeah, we can ask about that. Okay, so that is sort of a general consent action item there. And then as far as agendas in general, we have an agenda in front of us, as Brandon has referred to, which has been slightly altered. The Brown Act training is now at the end. We have decided to remove the CPA's suggestion, their own item. So we have 2 other items, which is to go over our recaps for the October 3rd community workshop, to discuss the feedback from the Planning Commission, the City Council, which I took lots of notes on, and the future agenda items that Brandon just referred to. Do we want to take those in the order they're in now, or does anyone have any preferences for that? So this is 6, 7, and 8 on the schedule. Everything same order? Everybody's okay with that order?
It's fine with me, yeah.
Okay. So the first one is the recaps from October 3rd Community Workshop. That seems to me, we have some in writing, and we have some who attended but did not submit in writing. I don't know if folks got a chance to go over the written parts, but
Madam Chair, would you like a staff report or an intro on this?
Yeah, sure. But I was just going to ask if the folks who had a verbal report would like to present today, or if we're just going to discuss the written submissions. So that was Dawn and I think Mary Ann, right, who were present but did not submit written comments about the workshop. Would you guys like to speak today about your comments?
Sure.
Okay, all right. Well, it sounds like Brandon would like to present first, so go ahead, Brandon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just brief. I mean, it's like to tee off agenda items so everyone in the public knows what we're talking about. So what's on the table there as people are coming in is a compilation of the 2 written notes that we got from our October workshop. If you recall, 4 out of our 5 members were there. Melanie was enjoying her time overseas and wasn't able to join us, but we did have 4 of our 5 members there acting as table hosts. And so we got some great feedback from the steering committee members after that. And so that's what the notes on the table there represent. And we're gonna go over those today and make sure we captured those correctly and see if they'll help inform even further as we go down the road. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to explain what this was to everybody.
Thank you. So, Mary Ann, would you like to go first with your comments on what you experienced or learned at the workshop?
Well, I think the tables were very different, depending on who was sitting at each table. So I was just first at a table that had absolutely no interest in discussing anything. So they went just straight to their workshop work pages. I think there were 2 people at the table that would have liked to talk and others not. So it was just not a very coherent, collaborative table. I switched tables then and was at a very fun, active table where everybody really participated in the discussions, which I think was the purpose. I think Brandon reminded everybody several times. I think you all did a great job preparing for that and trying to run the meeting, and if people don't adhere to your advice, I don't think any one of us can do much about that. So.
Okay, so uneven tables, it sounds like, is one take-home lesson. I wonder if there's anything that can be done about that. Don, do you want to
Sure.
report out?
Well, I can say that there was general agreement on some key items like pitch roofs, setback of the upper stories, the fence, the gates and portals. Everyone at my table certainly approved of those things. There was a rambling discussion of reviewing all the photos. I think I can say there's no clear preference for any specific houses. Generally, the comments I noticed that Doug Schmitz made followed, I think, ours. There was extended animated discussion about styles issues. That was inconclusive too, but several of the people at my table favored the storybook examples. Then there was brief discussion about the bulk plane issue. I think we need more explanation of that. As an architect, I'm not familiar with that, so I could be no help to my group at all. Well, that's my report.
For those of us who wrote in, Doug, do you have any comments about highlights of your written comments?
My table was made up mostly of longtime residents, so they had a perspective on design. Of the 14 photos shown, 8 were determined by the table not to be representative of Carmel. 5 had elements, 5 photographs had elements that could be applied to design standards in Carmel. There was only unanimous consent on one item, which was photograph number 7, that was Carmel. And number 8 photograph got a maybe. There was a commentary to want more information on the bulk plane concept, and that's probably something this committee should put on a future agenda.
You all already saw my comments that are here in front of you. To me, what I got out of it is mostly items I think that could be agendized for the future. So we don't really need to discuss them now. There's this mysterious landscape study that somebody at my table brought up, and maybe that person is here. I don't remember who it was, that just made me think of all Marianne's concerns, and I just wondered what that reference was to. I never saw it, and maybe someone on the staff is familiar with it, but it's hanging out there. But again, to me, this is a future agenda items only, so we can probably, unless there are other comments, I don't know if this is sort of almost like a committee report out of what we experienced. I don't know if anyone from the public wants to discuss or make any comments on the workshop on the 3rd. I would open it up to the public if you all are interested. Go ahead.
I just wanted to express that at our table we had a mixture of opinions, but everybody was really respectful of each other, and we were able to really express the depth of our opinions, but be respected. So I thought that was really good, and it was a fun experience. And thank you for making it so engaging.
Cool. Nice comment. Thank you, David. Anyone else who was either there or not there that was Ian?
Yeah, unfortunately, I was unable to attend the most recent workshop, but I did attend the first two, and I thought that they were both good. They were informative. I felt that the example photographs presented were not wonderful. And again, I have provided this resource to the city of Carmel-by-the-Sea of 300, well now 400 photographs of single-family homes in a variety of downtown buildings, as well of all manner of different architectural styles, and the city should feel free to incorporate that into the discussion process. Thank you.
Thanks for that offer, Ian. So ground truth. Is there another one? Oh, come on up, Carol.
I just wanted to say I was at Dawn's table, and we were the fairy tale cottage table.
I'm shocked.
We were pretty much in concert, and I thought we had a good table, a good discussion, lively and full of good comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Anyone from, oh, sorry, keep going. Ken?
Yeah, I think I want to compliment the planning department and Nori for 2 good sessions. We absolutely had a very positive feedback on the residential part of the general plan. The absolute failure, in my mind, was the business meetings, in that we had, I don't even remember anybody from the business sector that were there to give their opinions. So somewhere along the line, we're going to have to spend a little bit more time on the business area of our city, because I didn't get anything out of the business ones. I don't think anybody else did either. Thanks.
Thanks for the comment, Ken. If there's no one else in the room, is there anybody on Zoom who was either present or not present at the workshop that has any thoughts on the workshop of October 3rd? I assume I can see if there's a hand raised. I don't see anything. Okay, so unless there's any other comments on this item, maybe we'll move on to the next one. Yeah? Okay, so the next item on the agenda is to discuss the Planning Commission and City Council feedback on the strategy paper. I don't know, I'm trying to remember who's been, I've been, I think, to both of those. Some of us were present in the room, some of us were on Zoom. Maybe we should just go around the table and see what we think is what we observed, but first let's hear from the staff and see what their observations are of how that strategy paper was received.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So at the table and handed out to you today on the dais is are the notes that I took. I compiled these into a page from both the Planning Commission on October 12th and the City Council meeting this week. If at the committee's leisure, I can read through these for the benefit of the folks on Zoom who can't see them. If you'd like me to just run through them really quickly, it's certainly up to the committee.
I think it's a good idea, especially for the people on Zoom.
Okay. I did just put this together this morning. So at the Planning Commission meeting on October 12th, I did share these comments with the City Council. But in general, so these are generalized comments. Obviously, they're not quotations. But the Planning Commission felt the strategy paper accurately captured the feedback that the Planning Commission and what they had heard from the community. They didn't see any major omissions or inconsistencies. They did suggest that we should consider privacy and views in the guidelines, not just in the zoning code. As many of you know, our zoning code does address privacy and views, but considering how design might influence those things is something they thought we should take a look at. Clearly address second stories in the downtown. We've heard this pretty much every step along the way. We know we have to have housing increase in town because of state requirements, and so thinking about how we treat second stories and larger buildings in the downtown area. Clarify precedent. Obviously, if we're enacting new standards or tightening standards just because something was approved in the past doesn't mean it's going to get approved again. So making that clear in the design guidelines, there's no guarantees. And being aware of other state laws that might overlap with design, things like ADUs, housing, water, et cetera, as we're going through this process. So that brought us to the City Council meeting on November 1st. Where I did present those comments, and in addition to those, what we heard from City Council, this is a combination of all five, just like the Planning Commission. They did feel the strategy paper captured the Planning Commission and their feedback as well, and the community. They asked to be sure to include review of all the documents that are part of the design process, so they're consistent. And we've talked a little bit about that already in this committee. If there's documents that overlap with the design guidelines or zoning code, making sure that we're not creating inconsistencies. Ensuring that the language in the guidelines, updated guidelines, is more rigid for things that are key, shalls rather than shoulds for those things that are key. Being sure to address state laws, we heard that again. Treatment of the public right-of-way should be clear and well-defined. We've talked about that as well. Siting of the house on a lot is key. The siting should be done in a subordinate way so that the house is not, dominating the street. Determining why flat roofs have become more prevalent. This comment was, is it because they're popular in design, or is there something in the way the design guidelines are written right now that somehow incentivizes or encourages those? Emphasizing the quality of construction and materials, something we've talked a lot about in this group and at community meetings. Ensure that the guidelines also address the protection of trees through the design of projects. Considering adding a point of sale inspection into the zoning code to provide sort of a check along the way to get some of the non-conforming development out, things like extra site coverage. That would need to go in the zoning code, obviously, but it's still a very good point. They were very supportive and really liked the photos and the X's and the checks. They said those are very good for clearing up confusion. They asked if we develop a clear approach as to why something would either go in the guidelines or the zoning code, so that when we start teasing things out or putting things in the zoning code versus the guidelines, we know why we're doing it and that it's consistent. We heard from several of them, as we've heard from Marianne and others on this committee, the landscaping ordinance is very important and it must be done as part of this project, which I think we all are on board with that. Consider some mechanisms to make sure that the project checks all the key guidelines, maybe an actual document that when someone submits their development application, they have to essentially say, here's how I'm going to meet these key guidelines. Early in the process helps prevent any confusion down the road. Development of some sort of homeowner's guide as a compendium to the design guidelines that will help prevent confusion, set the expectations early on in the process for homeowners, what they're getting into and what they're going to be expected to do for developing in the city. They were very positive about the interactive workshops and continuing this format for any other ones that we have in the future. And of course, addressing man-made materials with a focus on the qualities that make a man-made material feel authentic. And again, we've talked about most of these already. So those are the notes that I took from the two meetings. And hopefully those are helpful to tear off your conversations here.
Thank you, Brandon. Does anyone have any other from the committee here notes that they would like to add or observations they had about the reactions from the Planning Commission and/or the City Council on this item? Marianne?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the right time, but I am not clear on, I mean, I did listen to your presentation. I was not here in person, and you did say there may be a landscape ordinance. It does say here that should be part of the process, but I don't see any action. I mean, I don't see any actions connected to that comment. So I'm just putting that out there, that I think we need to follow up and be clear on how are we going to implement that comment. I don't see that currently, in the process of revising the design guidelines.
Okay.
I'm pretty concerned, and I agree with Mary Ann, that I'm very concerned about that too, that it seems like we discuss landscaping all the time, but we never have brought the gentleman back again to listen to our comments, and I don't know if he can come to these meetings or not.
He gets invited to all of them.
See if we get something started on this and not wait for 2 or 3 more months, and the process we're in evolves further and further, and we still haven't, incorporated a meeting or issues relative to landscaping early on. We shouldn't wait till the very end.
Yeah. Well, perhaps I can comment on that a little bit, because I hear what Mary Ann and Melanie are saying. So just sort of a general overview of where we're at in the bigger process. So we started this 7 or 8 months ago. What we've gotten to now is we're at the strategy paper. And what the strategy paper does, if you recall, is it lays out the direction for the project. And landscaping is called out multiple times in the strategy paper as being very important. So the next step is really the drafting of the things to do the updates. So the landscaping ordinance is really next in the process, on top of starting to redline and update the design guidelines and doing those changes to the zoning code. So we haven't put any pen to paper yet on writing anything yet as far as like actual regulations for that reason, because the last 3 meetings, if you recall, the community meeting, the planning commission, and the city council, and this committee's meeting of 2 days worth to review that strategy paper prior to that, were all about, is the strategy correct? Are we going the correct direction? So now that we've heard from the community, planning commission, and city council that yes, that strategy paper is good, meaning that the parts in there that talk about landscaping, we now know from our decision makers that they're also on board with what we've all said, that landscaping is important. So the next step is starting to do that actual work. So it wasn't really appropriate yet, in my opinion, to start writing a landscape ordinance, because we technically hadn't heard from our decision makers, our policy setters, that they were on board with our recommendation for that direction. So it feels like we haven't done any work on a landscaping ordinance yet. There's a reason for that. To your comment, Melanie, about Mr. Trainer, I have been sending him invites to this. He's a busy gentleman, and I'm sure that he's following up and watching the videos, but he's been invited to all of these meetings.
But we wanted a landscape architect on the committee.
So
that was the idea, that we feel there should be, I mean, this is about public space, and I think I would prioritize that to any kind of revisions to the design guidelines, because I think if it's a very hot button and controversial issue, and if we focus on the space between the street and the front of the house, which is what the public sees, then I think that would be the most important item of all of what we are doing right now. And we had requested to get a landscape architect onto the committee for that purpose.
Okay, so if there was an actual request to go to city council and request for them to appoint a landscape architect to this committee, I did miss that. I thought that the plan was to have Mr. Trainer, sit in these meetings and watch, and then when we got to the point of actually writing a landscape ordinance, he would be involved in that potentially. That's where I thought we left it. But as far as going to the council and asking to appoint a 6th member to the steering committee, I don't recall that request. We can ask the city council. I mean, it would have. I suppose we could have asked that at the meeting this week when they asked for comments from the steering committee. But I apologize, I did miss that if that was a request to directly go to City Council and ask them to appoint a 6th member to the steering committee.
That's how I understood it. I think everybody else should chime in on that.
Well, you know what, why don't we save that as an agenda item, the appointment, and see if we want to take action on it as a group when we get to that item. But I certainly take your point. Any other thoughts about the Planning Commission and City Council reactions to everything?
I have a comment on the strategy paper. I have my draft from our meeting of August 29th, and I kept notes on my items and some of the items which my colleagues raised. And then I have the strategy paper that went to the council on Tuesday night. And so last evening I did a cursory review, and I find very little of what the committee said on August 29th in the strategy paper. So as an example, on page 10, strategy for the downtown design guidelines, at our August 29th meeting, in addition to the 7 items listed, there were about 5 or 6 other ones that committee members suggested. Yet the paper that went to the council Tuesday night still has the original 7 and none of the additions from this committee. So I'm bothered by that. And Melanie had suggested earlier that this might be a document where we start our review when we meet more frequently, and I think that's a good suggestion.
Does it begs the question of staff, Brandon, is the draft that you submitted and presented to the council and just the other night, is that considered a final draft, or were you planning on continuing to revise that document?
Well, it's a good question. That's the first I've heard that, Doug. Thanks for sharing that. So if there's things, I'd love to know what the committee thinks is missing. Some of the conversations that and Nori's on the call, and we can, he can speak to this too. When we went through all the comments, and I took, the same notes you did, Doug. I have those as well. When we went through, we felt that some of the comments were captured elsewhere in the paper. And so I'd like to know if you have specific comments of things that are missing. I can look and see if that was one of the things where we felt it was captured somewhere else, because it was already a very long document. And so we felt that in some cases the comments were captured elsewhere or more appropriate somewhere else. So you may not see it exactly where the notes were taken from the meeting. But if you want to pass those along to me, Doug, that would be really helpful so I can see. I don't know, Nori, do you want to comment on that at all about Doug's comment that his notes from the August 29th meeting weren't captured, or do you feel like what I said pretty much covers it?
Yeah, we had several sessions with Brandon going down the list of comments. And so if we did overlook something, it was unintentional, but Brandon really did capture it in that generally we felt the comment was covered one place or another in the paper, maybe not in the specific location that it was mentioned by the committee. But the idea is that paper is final. We're moving on from there. We can certainly take other comments and it's not that those are the only edits that are going to be made, the ones that are listed there. So if there are other ideas that come forward or something we missed, we can take that into consideration as we move forward now in developing an outline of the design guidelines. So there's certainly room to pick up ideas, but the intention is not to revise that paper itself, but to move on from there.
Thanks, Nori, for that. Let me suggest a possible technological problem that might have led to possible cross wires. It just occurs to me as we're sitting here. Those were long meetings we had to go through that very long document. And I don't question the rationale for this. It's always good to have a permanent PDF copy of where we stand at a snapshot in time, but without the normal tools of editing and track changes and things like that, we ourselves couldn't even probably easily determine whether we see our comments reappearing and where they might be, et cetera. Not that we have to be the ones editing the document, of course, just that using a tool like that would help us know, where didn't I say something and I'm purple and you're red and yellow. So it's just, I think it is a very heavy lift to go through the 27 pages one time as an individual, 5 times with your colleagues, then go back and check line by line whether the colleagues were heard. It's extremely difficult. And I imagine it's difficult. Obviously, sounds like everything that was missed was inadvertent. And so obviously there's some kind of technological difficulty going on here, and we need a better tool if we're going to be doing this in the future. It's a good thing to figure this out now. And again, there can be the official copy that doesn't have track changes, and there can be the working document. Does anyone have any objections to that or thoughts about that as a possible approach? No objections?
I think it sounds fine.
Sounds fine, okay.
So one thing I would ask, maybe, because Nori's completely right. If there were omissions, that was absolutely unintentional. I'd love to see if it sounds like Doug has some specifics. Maybe that's what you were alluding to earlier, Melanie, as well. Like you might have a couple specifics as well. If you have specifics, please give those to me. And what I can do is I can go through the paper, and if I can't point to where they're at, if it really was an omission, what we can do is look at, I mean, I want this process to be right. I mean, if it, it takes longer, it takes longer. So if we missed glaring sort of policy level stuff that I don't feel comfortable moving forward with because, the city council didn't sign off on it, then maybe we have to go back. I'm not saying that's what we would do, but if it's things that, there's a list and we miss 2 items on a list that fall under the same concept, that's easy enough to add in. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel like I would need to go back to city council or planning commission to make those edits. So maybe if you could share with me what you think is missing, then I can try to see what the next step would be.
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, the thing that concerns me is that we didn't see and have a chance to reevaluate all this before it went to the Planning Commission and City Council. So now we're at a point where Nori says we're not going to change anything. Well, we may have to change.
Well, that's what I just said. I mean,
a few things,
yeah.
And if you think it's appropriate to go to the council and commission, that's great. But I think that, and I have a problem with just handing you the written comments, Brandon, because I think what we need to do is...
You speak in your microphone, Melanie.
The committee needs to meet and go over what the concerns are of each person. Now, maybe not everyone is zeroed in equally in terms of their impression of the document that went to the decision makers, but I do think we need to schedule it for a future meeting and go through it systematically so that we don't, again, carry on ideas or points that are not consistent with how we have discussed or feel about things. And so I would just kind of suggest that. And then I would like to say one thing to Nori and Brandon, and I don't want you to take this personally, but in that document, we have been totally left out of the process. No one's discussed in this document the role of the steering committee and what we have tried to contribute. The team, quote unquote, is staff and Nori. And where are we? We're devoting hours and hours to this effort, and we should be considered as part of the team. As representatives of the community, I think that it's only right to mention the steering committee and our involvement in this whole process. And I just feel like we're being marginalized every time we kind of turn around. So I'm sure that's not the intent, but I think it needs to be in there so when the public looks at this, they understand that they had 5 people who were extremely, concerned and interested in what we're doing. And that we did represent them, and that we did go out and elicit comments and try to reflect a lot of what the community concern is.
Melanie, may I ask you a sort of logistical question? Do you and those of us who have things we didn't feel made it into the document, do you have it written up already, or could we write it up? And the reason I say that is that it's possible that in the end, one solution might be an addendum that captures the part of the steering committee thing. I throw that out there. It might be integrated. Brandon, may decide to treat it whatever way he likes for that strategy paper. Or Nori may say, we are going to leave that document behind, but we're going to have another document that's added to the mix. The only reason I bring it up is without the written comments, I think it is a little tougher to make a decision about how to handle all the comments. It doesn't preclude a discussion that we could have about those written documents, but would you be willing to prepare those if you don't have them already? And I just ask that of everybody.
Well, I have also the markup of that strategy paper, and I think where we fell short is that we all got that, and then it went out without us having a steering committee meeting. So I felt the same way, that we got the document, we all marked it up, we kind of can't talk to each other without the public presence, so we never had a meeting. So I would feel much better if we could talk about it rather than submitting formal comments without a discussion.
Okay.
Because I don't like to just present my view without us having a chance to talk about it.
Okay.
So I think that a meeting where we actually just basically roll this back a little bit and have for us to discuss the strategy paper. I mean, the bulk plan was a good example. I had no idea either. All of a sudden, bulk plan was presented, and you have 2 architects here, or 3, and we never had a chance to even talk about what would be the best way, the best alternative for the volumetrics.
Okay.
So I think that I'm hearing that we have general consent that this is an agenda item, which is also, of course, we still haven't gotten to item 8 on here, but I have noted that down. That is going to be one of our future agenda items. Number 7 also, so we've drifted a little bit off, and
Madam Chair, could I make one more comment on just before we leave this one?
I'm not leaving it, but go ahead and comment.
I just want to be clear, I apologize for the sentiment that I'm gathering here. It was certainly not intentional to move this on and not get your feedback. I think it was we felt like we heard you, and we thought we did a good job of capturing that, but it sounds like maybe we missed some. So it wasn't intentional. We were just trying to keep the process moving. So noted. Thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Brandon. And there's no assumption of intentionality. I think what I was going to say is we've drifted a bit onto our own thoughts about the strategy paper and away from item 7, which is to discuss the Planning Commission and City Council's thoughts about the strategy paper. Some people said some things about it, like Marianne and the design, the landscape ordinance. And is there any other thoughts people want to add to that? I mentioned at the beginning of this that I took copious notes, so I don't want to go first. So I want everybody else to tell me if they have notes on the PC/CC reactions to the strategy paper. Nope. Anybody?
Could I ask a question? If all this, I don't know if all the steering committees, I know there was a couple that were able to come in person. Was everyone able to tune in via Zoom and watch the city council? No.
Well, Marianne did.
I saw Marianne there.
I was there, but I had to cut, before we actually got to the meat of it, I had to cut out.
Okay.
I did watch the entire YouTube video.
Well, that's where I was going. It wasn't to ask. It wasn't to call people out. It's to let you know that it is on. There's a video you can watch if you want. If you want to rewatch it.
That's what I did. So
Okay.
I saw it all, but not in real time.
Okay, super.
I will point out there are technological glitches with the videos, though. The recent meetings we can view on YouTube, which the staff was kind enough, and the city clerk was kind enough to walk me through yesterday. but the ones that link from the agendas, which is how I was used to viewing videos, they're not working. And
Yeah, they're working with Granicus
they're
to
working
fix
on it
that.
now,
Yeah,
okay.
it's not an us thing, it's the host that's having
Yeah,
issues,
well,
so.
I know it's a bizarre,
Yeah.
glitchy thingy. Okay, so then if you don't mind, I will tell you some thoughts I have about the Planning Commission and City Council reactions that I just want to make sure are captured. I feel as though the staff, Brandon, has captured the general vibe of what happened at those two meetings, but I had some specifics I want to make sure don't get lost. I want to point out that in general, the Planning Commission, since we are so interested in this committee on the style issue, the Planning Commission is quite to the person concerned that we maintain the diversity of styles in this town. That's just their view. I'm recording it here. I thought personally that they were very prepared in general. I was very impressed. The idea of privacy language, I have a slight tweak on that. I'm not sure that it was meant to simply move the privacy language from the zoning, from the municipal code to the design guidelines. I think it was more of a general comment of just strengthening wherever that privacy language shows up. This particular commissioner had been concerned that a number of projects had that issue and she didn't have enough guidance on that. That was Aaron Allen. Same thing with the precedence issue. I found this extremely helpful to me as a former planning commissioner. The idea is that we see, and this is almost a snowball effect. Since people have mentioned it, somebody does something on their property. It may not have been approved. It may have nothing to do with our design guidelines as they are written now. Someone just did it without even knowing that it was in violation or not in violation. And then the neighbor has an application and requests something similar and cannot understand, of course, why that they can't have the same thing, because maybe that's against the guidelines as they are now, or maybe it's not appropriate for their lot. So this person, this is Aaron again, Commissioner Allen, wanted to make sure there was language in our documents that said there is no such thing as a precedence for the evaluation of an application. And I think that makes sense. In other words, you are always evaluated on the guidelines, you're always evaluated on the regulations. Just because you see something is not related.
That has been vetted by the city attorney, because that's completely against, the common law principles. So.
Well, it's not a legal matter, but I think we should ask him about it. But that was, this is not my view. I thought it was very interesting. I'm just quoting what Commissioner Allen said. There were a number of comments across the commissioners about their very ardent desire to have more tightness in all the documents as an assistance to them, so that they do not have to debate the meanings of the documents. They can only debate the application of the documents. We've talked about that ad nauseum, but that is something that I want to make sure gets into our understanding of what their reactions were. Commissioner Locke mentioned that she would like to see a site inventory for future housing issues. She said that she said there was one large omission, in her opinion, in the strategy paper, and that is this issue of housing. She mentioned a letter from Mike DeLappa and a presentation by another person and a whole host of laws that I wasn't as up on it as she was, about how she wanted to make sure that our documents that we're working on now are subordinate or are, not subordinate is the wrong word, but are mindful of the fact that we have state requirements coming down, and these must coordinate with that, and may in fact require that the state requirements be addressed first in certain sections of before we can address certain parts of the design guidelines. And I know there's a deadline of 2023 on that. So that was a major contribution that I think she eloquently, Commissioner Locke, put forward, including, and she was not the only person to say this, the council members brought this up also, there's this, I don't know if it's a again, a misunderstanding. We have currently a mezzanine capacity downtown, and we have 3 stories of height. Commissioner Locke brought up that we need to consider 3 true stories downtown. That doesn't have a change to the height. The staff notes, I don't know if this is just an error, but mentioned 2 stories. Commissioner Locke said 3 stories, as did later 2 other council members. So I just want to be clear that we don't need to think about second stories. That's already allowed. So they would like us to consider moving forward with changes to the zoning code that would allow more than 2 stories. Michael LePage wanted us to make sure we addressed the volumetrics and that those were not penalizing preservation and certain types of architectural styles. And of course, again, went back to the housing issue, the ADUs, and the attack on the R1 zoning, and just, again, wants to make sure that we are on top of that so that when those state things come down, we are properly handling them. As far as the City Council, Councilmember Ferlito was very strong, again, on the housing. She was another person on the housing issue in the same way, in the sense that our work has to be following the work that we have to understand what we need to do for housing in this town, and then make sure that the design guidelines follow up on that and guide that work, as opposed to, making sure they don't conflict. It's much stronger than that. She wanted all the documents, and this is almost an extension of the same point, all documents, whether it's zoning code, general plan, et cetera, to be addressed simultaneously. That meant to me, and a number of council members said this, if we have other things that need to happen, like the landscape ordinance, please, Brandon, come back and ask for funds. So they are very concerned that we make sure that all of our policies are aligned, even if that means adding to the workload here, and that addressing the municipal code. It's, again, not trying to avoid conflict with those documents, but actually to resolve those documents. Same thing with the processes. Councilmember Ferlita brought up that and we've already brought this up too, but just whether it's enforcement, whether it's the application process, all the sort of steps that go toward implementing whatever these documents turn out to be, also need to be studied by this group, or by this entire effort. There were pleas by many people. She was another person who said that 2 stories was insufficient for downtown. We need to work on that. Lots of people said on the council to remove this discretionary language, of course. Jeff Barron mentioned the missing landscape ordinance. And many people mentioned homeowner guide or realtor guides as a sort of, and we've talked about that a lot. There was, as Brandon pointed out, the synthetic materials issue that came up from Carrie and Bobby. Dave also brought up the housing issue and making sure that we are working on that. Mayor Potter, I mean. And there was one other thing here. I can't find it. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure that that level of detail was not lost. I think that I hope, and you'll have to bear with me if I'm going to try to be the chair here, I hope that we get better and more disciplined, all of us, about communicating what it is that's just a chat and what it is that we actually want to put into action. I would argue that the folks who took the time to prepare on the PC and the CC with their notes and their direction to staff meant that to be probably a motion or have the force of an action. They probably didn't think they were just chatting about these are things they really want to see, and yet those were not put into true action items. That just wasn't the structure of the meeting. I hope that we can be more clear about that as we go forward, just because the sorts of things we've talked about today and the misunderstandings might have a chance of being avoided. And so I am submitting, I guess, unless there's any objection, that those comments be thought of by the staff as action items from the two committees, the commission and the council. And that is, unless there are other comments about item 7, we're then going to move on to future agenda items. Any other comments on item 7, which is this strategy paper?
Thanks for your summary.
Yeah, good, very good.
Okay. So,
Victoria, I think that
Yes.
I sort of, as you read that, also read along what the paper that what Brandon presented. And I think that really everything was captured in his paper, with the exception of your very first comment that the Planning Commission was concerned that the diversity of styles be preserved. I think that's the only comment that you don't have, and everything else actually is nicely captured in what Brandon presented today.
I think there's the one error there that I think has to be corrected is the second story versus more than second story issue.
Yeah.
So, Madam Chair, I will go back to the video because I don't actually recall them saying they wanted us to go down the road of exploring adding third stories to our zoning code. I'll look at that video. The note here that I took was what we're already doing, that knowing that there's going to need to be more second stories, we need to be extra conscious of some of the exercises we've done already in the community workshops about bulk and mass in the downtown area when you add a second story. I will go back and look at the video though to see
Third story, right?
no. So what I recall, and I'll go back and look at the video, because what I took away from that is that recognizing that, yes, second stories are allowed downtown, but they don't get built very often. The fact that they're probably going to become more prevalent, we need to be really, or like our downtown design guidelines right now don't speak to bulk and mass and second stories. So the exercises we've done, the 3D modeling in the workshops where we talked about that really needs to be an important part of the guidelines. But if I missed that and they were saying we need to plan for third stories, then that absolutely needs to be in here. So I'll go back and see. And I think, Madam Chair, you mentioned you heard that at the City Council as well?
It was Commissioner Locke, Commissioner LePage, and Council Member Ferlito.
Okay.
And I will add my name to that as an action item. We need to consider third stories or more than 2 stories downtown. So that is my action item from this committee as a steering committee chair. Unless there are objections to that. No objections. So that's a committee action item. Okay, so on to future agenda items, many of which are kind of hinted at anyway by the discussions we've had so far. Let's just start. Sorry, Marianne, I'm looking right at you. You're at that end.
I'm not going to sit here next time.
Yeah, don't sit there again.
Yeah, I would like to put the additional committee member that we had requested as a landscape architect to be part of our committee. And that we discuss about the priorities that we set in the process of revising the design guidelines, with giving the public space a higher priority and actually putting maybe a pause onto the rest of the design guidelines until we have that brought a little further along.
Those are your 2? Oh,
yeah, and then I also think it would be very useful to look beyond photographs and maybe have a walk through town with the whoever is interested, and actually look at projects that are good representatives of contemporary architecture. And I mean, what Mr. Di Girolamo, for example, brought up as a comment, that there's a rich history of mid-century architecture that's actually part of our town that has been here. So part of you said you came here because of the charm of Carmel, but these houses have been around for 50, 60, 70 years, and they are modern houses. So they can be part of the charm of Carmel if they're done right. And I think there is rightfully so, a big reaction to a lot of really bad architecture that we have seen lately in town, and none of us are interested in the proliferation of that, but it has really nothing to do with those being contemporary architects. So there is a rich history of very good local modern architects. Mr. Dilshalama mentioned Henry Hill. There's Mark Mills. There is people that are still with us, like Don Goodhue, David Allen Smith. I mean, you have a lot of wonderful architects that have worked here in the contemporary space and have done really good work. You probably don't even notice these houses because they are done so well. So, and I think it would be a good exercise as to schedule a walk and visit those places. Even I drove by the Carmel Bay Company the other day. That's a very contemporary project, but it just blends beautifully with its surroundings. 1926. I mean, it's amazing. So I think that would be a useful public event.
Public walkthrough. Okay. Are those your three so far, Marianne?
Yeah.
Any objections to any of those three? Okay. So public walkthrough town, what was the 1926? I just was...
7 Arts.
7 Arts. Oh, thank you. Right, I know that. Okay. You're next, Doug.
I have 3 items. One is a preliminary discussion on a landscape ordinance, plus the examining the existing city policy, such as the right-of-way policy that Catherine Wallace sent us last month. And Brandon has adopted or implemented a new standard of approval regarding utility meters. I'd like to see that. And these all don't have to be on the next agenda.
Do not have to or do have to?
They don't have.
Do not have to.
They're going to take time, and so there may be some that we want to put off for another meeting. Second is the beginning of a discussion about housing downtown. There's both the zoning issue, but there's also the design part of that. And third is the bulk plane, carried over from our workshop.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's 1, 2, 3. Any objections to any of Doug's ideas for agenda items? I don't see any. Okay, Don, you're up.
Okay. Well, I don't mean to belabor the issue, but I want to talk about the landscaping ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
Susan Manchester said you can't legislate good design. We know that. What we can legislate is what happens in the city right-of-way and the minimum standards for landscaping. I've become very much aware, just because of this discussion we've had last few meetings, about the importance of that. I think probably or possibly the most important thing to come out of our entire work is the landscaping of the right-of-way. All of the people who discuss things talked about the screening of the architecture with trees and how important that was, so there's no disagreement at all about the importance of it. I think it's an urgent need. I would comment on Marianne's comment about adding a landscape architect to the committee. Technically, I think we need a landscape architect as a resource, and doesn't have to be a member of the committee. I don't think he can do his job by waiting till later unless he hears us discuss all the ramifications. I think it's terribly important. And frankly, I don't see an urgent need for that. I don't know if the city yet has a proposal from Bernard Traynor or not, but to me that'd be a very important first step. Second point is I'm disturbed that the discussion about architecture is kind of either or. I agree with Ken White's last sentence in his cover letter, solutions of the past can help solve issues of the present. I think we need to foster a deeper understanding of what Carmel's architectural history is all about. There's different periods of style, different things that came up at different periods. And nobody's talking about that. We're talking about either this today or one period before, which is a very important one, of course. But the flow of history in Carmel, to me, is terribly important. And we're just a speck at the end of the line. I thought the PowerPoint examples we have to discuss architecture were frankly constricted, very limited. And that's why I think we need this much broader, much deeper look at what's contributed to the character of Carmel. I don't think there's a sufficient appreciation of all the elements of that. Possibly we can get some help from respected architectural historians to help us get this broader view of the past. So that's a very important thing, along with the landscaping, I think.
Thank you, Don. Melanie?
Well, I think that the issue of faux materials, there is a lot of discussion in the strategy paper and around this dais about authenticity, handcrafted, calling out special materials, special approach, and so forth to dealing with design, etc. So I think we need to have a discussion and have samples of the materials that are supposedly very forward-thinking and potentially adaptable to Carmel, because I see a lot of people very concerned about the use of faux materials, and there can be good faux materials, and then there can be really, really bad ones. And so I would think that we need to discuss that and see examples and have a real thorough understanding before we jump in and say that we support certain faux materials and we don't support others. I could not possibly participate in a decision on materials without having seen what is the state of the art, and then I certainly know the ones around town that don't work and haven't worked and look terrible, and I think we should take a look at those as a group and before we make any decision on faux materials. I think windows and roofs and garages and garage doors are extremely important in evaluating design, and those elements of a structure really make the difference in whether something works or doesn't work. And I put down landscaping like everybody else, so I know we're going to deal with that. And then fences and walls is part of maybe landscaping too, because fences and walls are extremely important. And I personally have a real issue about high fences, high walls in adjacent to the right-of-way in the front yard. We can't. Carmel is not known for walling off the pedestrian or the driver as they go up and down the street, and I think it sends a very bad message to allow something greater than say 4 feet. And we have 4 feet as what's supposed to be used, but then we get to the precedent issue again, or the fact that something is supposedly non-conforming with current standards, but people come into the desk and ask for, well, this is what was there before, and if we don't have clear directions, as we've said ad nauseum to the staff, it puts the staff in a very difficult position. So those are some of the things that I think we need to review, as well as we need to really discuss and figure out this whole design review board issue. I notice in all of the comments and whatnot that it's an issue that's discussed, and I think we should come to some kind of, decision-making on that. And then, of course, I think, we need to devote some time to our strategy paper, which encompasses all of the things that we're talking about.
Thank you, Melanie.
Can I add quickly something to that? It's
Yes,
me.
please.
I want to say I don't think we want to consider faux materials. We want to consider man-made materials, because faux in itself is exactly what we, I think,
That's the
don't.
terminology, you know what I mean, Mary?
Yeah, but faux is trying to imitate something in a modern material that is supposed to be a natural material, which I think in our previous discussions we already said this is really not something we support. But what we would be supporting is man-made materials
That are not faux.
sort of honest in its way, but comparable to natural material, or blend well with natural materials.
I think we can note that as part of the same discussion completely, like as a factor, whether something is man-made and honest versus faux. So I take that point. I'm adding that to Melanie's agenda item. Any other follow-up before I throw in mine, which are going to be similar? It occurs to me that when we all seem to be moving toward landscape as a priority, so far from today's meeting, landscape a priority, and then out of the council and PC commentary, but also my own mind, the 2023 housing issue, that the deadline makes that a priority also, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever. Then we have the idea of the strategy paper being kind of the timely thing, because we're just dealing with that right now. So to me, of everything we've said, those are the top three, not in terms of importance necessarily, although they may be that too, but just in terms of speed with which they need to be addressed. So I'm going to throw that out there as an initial comment. I think that also begs one corollary subject, which is, in general, how do we answer the question of what to tackle first, what we want to study first? In other words, what are the anticipated impacts on a zoning code or a municipal code or the housing element, et cetera? So how do those little pieces fit together? I think that's very difficult for me as a layperson to figure out, but it might also inform what to tackle when. So those are just general comments on what's already been said. To add a couple little things to things that have been said, I think it would be interesting to invite the new housing ad hoc members to participate when we talk about the housing agenda item. I think that in general, I would like to see, this is kind of on Don's point, a more scholarly approach to our informing ourselves. I would like to get educated. Let's take Melanie's example of faux or man-made materials. I would like to either myself do research that I might share, or have others do research that they might share, have a presentation. Dawn was talking about a history recap. Marianne was talking about looking out in the community at actual buildings. I think I'd like to have a higher bar for research and sort of scholar-like investigations of these issues, so that I feel I'm grounding my advice to the council, who we are advisory to, in actual work, not just I wish I don't like this type of roof and I do like that type of roof in terms of a material, but these are the stats on this roof. This is the scholarship on this type of work, on these type of materials. This is the life cycle of that type of material. Whatever it is that we decide as a criteria, I would like to be able to present to the city council our advice based on true research, not just our opinions and not just our reflection on what we all have talked about, frankly. So a little bit higher bar than that. That is my overall comment. Otherwise, I think that most of what you all have I think you guys all captured things I would have said. The volumetric thing, I think you mentioned that. I mean, I would love a presentation on volumetric. Again, don't think that's the highest priority in terms of sequencing. So maybe, if there are no objections, we should schedule for the next meeting an overall discussion of sequencing of what to discuss, what documents to discuss and tackle first, presuming that one of the answers is going to be the landscape ordinance, and the other example is probably going to be something with housing. But I'd like to personally embed that in a larger discussion of, are we right about that? Are we right about that sequence? So what do people think of that comment? Any objections to that? No? Okay, so then by general consent, that's the action that we're going to take as a committee. So it is time for public comment again.
Madam Chair, could I interject just 1 second, please?
Oh, yes, sorry, Brandon, go ahead.
Two things. One, I guess I would ask, since we're developing agendas for future, I might suggest that the committee, since you've appointed a chair and a vice chair, do you want to work with staff to build those agendas? Do you want to do, so like the city council, for example, the mayor and the mayor pro tem meet with the city administrator to set the agenda for the next meeting.
I think that's
I might
a great
offer
idea.
something like that for this committee so that we have at least 2 members of the committee who are driving that agenda with staff, because obviously, like I said, staff still needs to be involved. There's going to be things on here that we're going to have to provide information for you. So I would suggest that. It's up to you, but it might be a good way to do that.
No, I think it's a great idea. If there are no objections from the committee, I think I said something to that effect about making sure we coordinate with you to get staff items that need addressing on every agenda that where you want them. And I think that idea of 2 people meeting to hammer that out is a fine way to handle it. So it's the normal way to handle it. So.
And then my second comment would be, before we go to public comment, please recall that we moved the Brown Act training after item 8, unless you want to take public comment and then go to the Brown Act training.
Yeah, my opinion, but I'm going to defer to the committee, of course, is that the Brown Act training is not something that the folks here in the room have to stick around for. It's not, they don't need Brown Act training. So it could technically take place after public comment, and then they would be free to leave. Is that any objections to that?
That makes sense.
Okay, so let's open it up to public comment. Anybody want to comment on anything you've seen here, including agenda items, structure, future thoughts of things you'd like to see agendized? Anything at all?
I just wanted to endorse a couple of points that came up during the discussion. I think that yes, having a strong voice for landscape is crucial. So much of what drives our understanding of what good architecture is in our village is its ability to subordinate to the forest. Therefore, that is certainly a landscaping matter. And in my survey of the photographs I mentioned earlier, what really helped a building succeed or fail to blend into this context was the plantings around it, right? Especially the natural forest. I think ideally, Carmel-by-the-Sea is an uninterrupted forest punctuated with houses, right? And so having somebody who can speak professionally about the importance of landscape design, I think, would be a very important addition to your team. I don't know how that person would participate in that, but having that person is core to what your mission is today. The other thing I thought was a very good idea is to have the tour that Mary Ann was talking about, where you're looking at various houses and discussing what makes the house work or not work, as the case may be. It can be tricky because of the eclecticism in the village. There are wonderful and terrible examples spread out through a pretty wide area around the square mile. So identifying a particular stretch could be an interesting challenge, but I think that there are places that would facilitate such a discussion. And just to harken back to another thing, I think that, we look at Carmel-by-the-Sea, right? And a lot of people will look at it and they see Hugh Comstock's Storybook Cottage, which are iconic to us. all right? But let's not forget that Hugh Comstock did not do storybook cottages forever. He graduated the post-adobe style, which often had shed roofs, no ornamentation. They embodied characteristics of mid-century modern through and through, and that's Hugh Comstock, right? So who did that? So as is the case of so much architecture or anything that is truly an art, there is an element of exploration and evolution, right? And Hugh Comstock, who is the Carmel-by-the-Sea signature architect, bar none, right, embodied that in his own career, okay? And another point, too, is that Frank Lloyd Wright, who designed the house out here on Carmel Point, the south end of our beach, right? That is the most high-profile single-family home on the Monterey Peninsula, okay? So Carmel-by-the-Sea was incorporated in 1916. Frank Lloyd Wright designed that house in 1948. It was completed in 1951. So this village was only 35 years old when modernism, capital M, came to town. And I defy anybody to tell me that that house is not Carmel. All right? The same goes for the Carl Cherry Center. Okay, who here is brave enough to say that the Carl Cherry Center is not a Carmel building? You know what? It's a mid-century building. It's got a flat roof, and it blends beautifully into the forested nature of the surrounding. So I am deeply empathetic with the Carmel Preservation Association. I, too, do not want Carmel-by-the-Sea to become anywhere USA, all right? And that is why it's so important to get these guidelines right, because they are the guardrails to prevent Carmel-by-the-Sea from becoming just another collection of random houses with no real sense of place.
I'm told, right, Ian, that your 3 minutes are up, so.
Fine, I'll bring it home. So anyway, but banning free expression by banning an entire class of architecture is not the way to go about doing it.
Thank you, Ian, for your comments. Anyone else want to comment on the general proceedings here?
I think it's going really well. I love the organization, and I'll be glad to be a part of it going forward. I just wanted to say I really love the idea of a walk around to see examples to sort of help people understand, and for the ideas of traditional versus modern to be clarified, because I think we all agree that the Frank Lloyd Wright house is beautiful and wonderful and should be here, and we should do more of that. So I think that if we can get clearer on that and not just have these broad terms that don't make sense, when there's ways in which we overlap, would be great. Thanks.
Thank you for that comment, David. Any other comments from the public that's here in the room? Public members in the room? Okay, I'm going to ask if, seeing none, is anybody online? The dwindling numbers of folks online. Anyone want to make a comment? Okay, I don't see anything there in public comments. So I am going to let the public leave if they like. This is not the subject matter of our meeting today. The Brown Act is simply training for us as as steering committee members, sorry. So welcome to stay, of course, but no need to stay. All right. Thanks, everybody, for all that good input. Welcome, attorney.
Well, thank you.
Purick.
So my name is Brian Purick still, and I am still the city attorney for the city of Carmel. I'm also the city attorney for some other cities, City of Pacific Grove here on the peninsula, as well as some cities to the south, City of Atascadero and Camarillo. And I've been practicing municipal law for my entire career, and I'm familiar with the requirements of the Brown Act, and I know that Brandon has shared with me the background that you all have, and you are all experienced in dealing with public agencies and Brown Act issues. So much of what I'm going to say, I'm sure you may already be familiar with. So I don't intend by these comments to cover all the issues of the Brown Act, which would take a few hours, and I intend to limit my comments to perhaps 10 minutes. I know you've been here for a while already this morning. So as you all know, the Brown Act requires that agendas be posted, just like the agenda that you had posted for today's meeting. You are limited under the Brown Act to discussing what is on the agenda. And in terms of public comment, you can have public comment both on matters on your agenda as well as non-agenda items as well. The Brown Act does limit your ability to respond to public comment on non-agenda items. What the Brown Act says is there can be a brief response. So if there's a question that's asked or something like that. But if a member of the public should make a comment on a non-agenda item, you cannot all engage in a discussion about it and start basically turning it into an agenda item. So my advice to you is, if such an item should come up, is that you thank the speaker for bringing it up, explain that it's not on the agenda so you can't be discussing it, but that you will consider putting it on a future agenda, because obviously the theory is that when a member of the public reads your agenda, they expect that that's what you're going to talk about, and it's not going to include items that aren't on your agenda. So that's agendas. Secondly, types of meetings. I'm sure you're all familiar with the fact that you can have a regular meeting, which is on 72 hours notice. The agenda has to be posted at least 72 hours before the meeting. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean business hours. It could be posted on a Friday, for example, and you count the weekend. You can also have special meetings, and those can be set on 24 hours notice. And sometimes what I see is that a regular meeting will be set, the agenda will go out, and then another item comes up. And then my advice typically is you can send out a special meeting agenda if there's something that came up that wasn't on your 72-hour agenda. So that's typically how I recommend you deal with that. So that's under types of meetings. The third thing I want to talk about is remote meetings. As you, I'm sure, are familiar, AB 361 allows for teleconferencing for meetings of legislative bodies. The City Council has approved the AB 361 resolution since it was authorized, and that permits members of the legislative body to attend by teleconferencing or Zoom or virtual. It's got a bunch of different names. However, that law, AB 361, is only going to remain in effect until the state declaration is rescinded. And based on newspaper reports and also declarations from the state government, it sounds like Governor Newsom is going to rescind that declaration of emergency sometime in February. So when that happens, AB 361 will sunset, and you will not be able to have meetings, not only just you, but any legislative bodies in the state will not be able to use AB 361. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that members of the public could not attend by Zoom or virtually. So those are so-called hybrid meetings that would allow them, as your meeting was today, you were all present, and you had this hybrid type meeting, so members of the public could still attend, even though AB 361 has sunsetted. And there's another law that was recently passed that goes into effect on January 1 of 2023 that allows teleconferencing, but it's under very limited circumstances. There has to be a showing of a good cause in order for that to be permitted, typically a health issue or something related like that. I think the goal of that is to get meetings to be back in person and to limit the opportunities for members of legislative bodies to attend virtually. And then there's the traditional teleconferencing under the Brown Act, and that's also pretty restrictive in terms of what is allowed for you to attend. Oftentimes, if you're out of state or something, and you could attend by phone or virtually, but your meeting place, wherever you are, the hotel room or wherever you might be, you have to post on your door what the agenda is, and a member of the public would have access to wherever you are to present public comment at that location. So my experience has been that's something that's very rarely used, primarily for that reason. So that was the third thing, remote meetings. The fourth thing I want to talk about are serial meetings. Serial meetings are meetings that can take place in a couple of different ways. One is called the so-called hub and spoke method of a serial meeting, where one person will reach out to 2 or 3 or more members of the legislative body, that, and then that creates basically a discussion that's going on offline. And by offline, I mean not at the meeting like we were today. And then there's also the daisy chain. I'm not sure who came up with all these metaphors, but there's the daisy chain method where member A speaks to member B, who speaks to member C, who speaks to member D. So you basically are having a meeting, and you don't have to be taking action. It's just discussion is sufficient to generate that serial meeting. So serial meetings need to be avoided. You need to have, and the logic of it obviously is that the public needs to hear what you are saying to each other, because they want to know what your thoughts are. They want to have an opportunity to participate in the discussion as well. Just like today that you had public comment, as a matter of fact, twice on your agenda. So I think that's kind of the logic to serial meetings. Now, in terms of discussions, under the code, that is very broadly interpreted. That includes communications that are made, posted, or shared on an internet-based social media platform between members of a legislative body. That includes comments or use of digital icons such as emojis or a liking post. And there's a new law, AB 992, which became effective January 1 of 2021, and that creates a bright line rule, and it prohibits even one member of the legislative body from responding directly in any manner to any other member's social media post that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body, that is made, posted, or shared by any other member of the legislative body. And there are no exceptions to that rule. So my advice to you is not to get involved in social media posts. You should avoid that when it involves another member of the legislative body.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Could you give me that AB number again?
The AB is 992, AB 992.
Thank you.
And the government code section that it amended is 54952.2. Okay, so we've talked about just now serial meetings. I explained to you about discussion. I also spoke with you about the special rules of 992. And the last thing I want to talk about, and I should also mention before I move on, is that emails are discussions. So you should not be emailing each other or texting each other because those are discussions, and that's not permitted under the Brown Act. Okay, now, what are the exceptions? When can you, other than a meeting like you have here today, when can you get together? So there's 6 exceptions, and I'm going to go through those now. They're all listed in Government Code section, and I'll say this slowly, 549.52.2C. 549.52.2C. So you can have individual contacts. The Brown Act does not prohibit individual contacts between a member of a legislative body and other persons. That recognizes that you may be wanting to speak with constituents, the newspaper, or a single colleague. However, these contacts cannot be in stages to form a consensus, and that would be the serial meeting I described previously. So that's 1. 2, conferences. A majority of the member of the legislative body can attend a conference or similar gathering but cannot discuss official business among themselves. So typically, like, for example, the League of California Cities has an annual meeting. There may be 3 or more members of the legislative body that attend that conference, but they can do that. But they just can't, outside of the conference, go, out to a restaurant and have 3 of them there and start talking about business just because they're attending a conference. You attend the conference, you listen to the conference, you don't talk amongst yourselves. So that was the second. Third are community meetings. The majority of a legislative body can attend an open and publicized meeting organized by another organization as long as agency business is not discussed among the members at the gathering. So the key words here are open and publicized. So open means it's open to the public. It can't be a private meeting. And publicized is not defined in the Brown Act in terms of what is required for it to be considered publicized. But often what I'll see is the city will post something on its website, there might be a press release, there may be an ad in the newspaper, a newspaper reporter might write about it. I know here in Carmel, you have a Friday letter that the city administrator puts out. Maybe it's put out there. Chamber of Commerce, whoever that's sponsoring the event, does something to let the public know. Because it doesn't do any good to say we've got a meeting going on, but they haven't told anybody about it except for certain private individuals. So the public needs to know about that. So that's the third one. The fourth one is other agency meetings. A majority of the legislative body may attend an open and noticed meeting of another body of the local agency or any other agency, as long as official business is not discussed among the members while attending the meeting. So that would allow you, 3 or more of you, to go to a meeting of the Planning Commission or the City Council or the Board of Supervisors or any other public agency, as long as it's a noticed meeting, because once it's a noticed meeting, then it's, the public would know about it, and you can attend and you can participate. You could speak at the meeting that you attend. Okay. Finally, social or ceremonial events. Majority of the legislative body may attend a purely social or ceremonial event as long as business items are not discussed among the members at the event. So if it's a wedding or a funeral or some other social or ceremonial event, ribbon cutting, groundbreaking, those are typical things we see where there's an event. You can go to that, but you just can't be going off to the side and having conversations amongst yourselves. Because again, the whole theme of the Brown Act, and it's also, and I'm sure you all know this, is called the Open Meeting Act. So it's one that your business is conducted openly, the public knows about what you're going to be talking about because it's on the agenda, and the public has an opportunity to participate. So when you think of that as your guidepost, that kind of explains the logic of a lot of these rules. So as I said in my beginning, I did not attempt to cover every single rule in the Brown Act in 10 minutes. But I think I hit the highlights.
6 exceptions, Brian. So is it, I counted 5.
I think,
Yeah, 6,
I noticed that too, and
It
I was
was
looking
6?
at my notes.
Yeah, 6.
I think
No, it's
that,
5. But
It's 5 so
he
far.
said 6.
yeah, I'm not sure if social and ceremonial are separate,
Okay,
to be
so
honest
maybe
with
it
you.
is 5.
Yeah.
Okay. I was
Here's-
waiting for
yeah.
another shoe to
Yeah.
drop.
Yeah. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow, because I noticed the same thing. I'm going to follow up with Brandon and get you a copy of the code section, and I'll send it to you. And I believe I've covered them. There may have been one of these that covered more than one, which is why it's 5 instead of 6. But I'll send it to Brandon and let him circulate my email to you, and I'll include a copy of the code section.
Brian, you might have, I don't know if you heard this, but a couple questions came up in our discussion that we wanted to pose to you. Is that all right?
Sure.
Do you have a moment?
Yeah.
You guys can correct me if I've captured them wrong. Marianne was interested in the idea of precedence. This is a lawyer, this is not a Brown Act question, it's a lawyer question, and we have you here as a lawyer, so we're taking advantage.
And I see that. Go right ahead.
Okay, good. So we had a comment from a planning commissioner who I think very astutely raised an issue that they've been dealing with on the commission, that sometimes applicants come in and say that they saw someone do something they want to do on their property, on a neighbor's property. It turns out that thing is not something the Planning Commission wants to approve. Maybe it's inconsistent with the guidelines. We don't know how that thing got on the neighbor's property. This person from the Planning Commission was concerned to have a principle in which that she asked us to look into as a guidelines committee that would help her assert that precedence doesn't establish any legal rights. The fact that you see something around town that might not be kosher does not mean you get to do it. And Marianne asked the question, is that true? Or is there some established legal precedence by something that happens out there?
Well, I know the answer to this because my mom always used to tell me that two wrongs don't make a right. So if your neighbor, for example, trims their tree without a permit, let's just take that as hypothetical. That doesn't mean you can trim your tree without a permit. What that means is your neighbor violated the city's code, and the city's code enforcement people will need to have a conversation with that person. So there is no legal precedent to violate your code. If somebody violates your code, there's consequences to that, and one of those consequences is not establishing a precedent so that you can do the same thing that your neighbor did.
Okay, Marianne, Philip.
I don't think that maybe that was meant to be a violation of a code. What we were talking about is the interpretation of the design guidelines, which were interpreted in a certain way in one house, and therefore it can have a certain amount of bulk or color or a window that was allowed to be used. It was not in violation, so it wasn't a wrong. It was just how it was interpreted. And we then think that this is a terrible precedent, and we don't think that was interpreted correctly. And the question is, if that person sues the city because the planning commission doesn't want to approve something, would they have legal standing or not?
Well, the answer again is that the interpretation often can be done, there might be an interpretation by a certain body at a certain time, 10 years ago or 20 years ago or yesterday, whenever the timing is. That does not create a legal precedent. Okay. It is not legally binding. The only thing in the law that's legally binding in terms of a precedent would be a court decision, and then that can be cited as precedent for a future action involving similar circumstances. But the answer is that it does not create a precedent.
Wonderful. That's a good clarification. Thank you, Marianne, for that clarification of the question. There was another question that came up in our discussion earlier today about the agendas. We'd been talking about trying to have more sort of workshops amongst the five of us and how to agendize that. My suggestion, but we wanted to clear it with you, was that we have an action item on every agenda that allows for open discussion of our subject matter jurisdiction, which is to revise the design guidelines and be able to discuss that and possibly take action or direction, give direction. I don't know if there's anything illegal about that. It's our mission to discuss those things, but that was the question.
Well, what I've seen is that you would hum a few bars about what it is you're going to be talking about. So you wouldn't just say workshop. You would say workshop to discuss issues regarding design, guidelines. As much as you can put in there to kind of remember the guidepost is the public needs to know what it is you're talking about. It can't just be a jump ball where it's just, we're going to talk about whatever we want to talk about.
Right.
You can't do that. A lot of this is common sense. So think of yourself as a member of the public. You read whatever you put down on your agenda on item 10, whatever, and would you, as a member of the public, understand what it is that's going to be discussed? Now, there's often, I see a placeholder in many agendas, and maybe it's on yours, for future, there is, number 8, future agenda items. So, that is not a real specific topic, of course, because you're talking about something that's going to be happening in the future. But that does allow some flexibility, if you will, to say, all right, I want to talk about A, B, and C, and then you kind of talk amongst yourselves and say, yeah, let's put that on a future agenda. So you can talk like that about what's going to be added to the future. But if you want to talk about it at the meeting you're at, not at a future meeting, just remember that it needs, under the Brown Act, in 20 words or less, you need to provide a description of what the topic is that's going to be discussed. So it can't just say workshop. It should have some additional language to let the public know what it is you're talking about.
And maybe if it's okay with you, when we get to that point, is it okay to run it by you?
Sure.
Okay.
You send it, everything, I think for continuity's sake, I say everything goes through Brandon, and then remember, don't be copying each other on these emails, and then Brandon can consult with me and I'll get back to him.
And then I had a question to add. Let me first ask if there's any other questions that have come up in our discussion that you'd like to ask the attorney.
Could you clarify for me, maybe I missed it, the bright line instance? Can you define the bright line?
Was that the social media
I mentioned the bright
one?
line.
Yes.
Yeah, that was in reference to AB 992, and that's the recent law that prohibits you from responding to another member's social media post. So if member A puts something on a social media post, do not post on
No
that.
likes.
I mean, you can.
So don't go on Melanie's Instagram and give her a thumbs up, okay?
Yeah, you can read it. You can read it, but do not, because then you're engaging in an offline discussion.
And here's the last question, Attorney Pierik. You mentioned several times in the exceptions for talking amongst ourselves, I imagine we can talk about the weather.
Oh, of course.
We can talk about things that we can socialize, but we cannot talk about what you called official business or subject matter jurisdiction.
Exactly.
And those two terms refer to the items that we are designated to discuss and resolve as a committee.
Yes, so if you wanted to talk about some matter of city business that wasn't within your subject matter jurisdiction, like, let's say, beach fires or, something else, if it's not within your jurisdiction, yeah, you can talk about that, but you can't be talking about things within your subject matter jurisdiction. But my advice to you is that the best way to be very safe about all that is don't have those conversations about beach fires, because oftentimes, if you guys are sitting around, a coffee shop or whatever, and you're having that kind of a, offline conversation, if suddenly something that's within your subject matter starts to creep into the conversation, then it creates the opportunity for a potential violation. But I don't want to tell you that you can't talk about things that aren't in your subject matter jurisdiction, because you can.
Got it. Okay, those were my questions. We've covered everybody else's questions. We are over
I've got one
time.
question.
Oh,
First of all, thank you for the training.
yes.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for coming back after our lengthy meeting. I recently saw an article about a city in England that King Charles was involved with design details, and it was a lengthy article, and I wanted to send it to my colleagues. Is that permitted, not permitted? It's
just an
informational only.
It's an article.
News article?
Now,
It's informational.
yeah, you can send, my advice is to send it to Brandon, and then he can check in with me. Okay. Sometimes, if the article is, let's say, advocating a position on an issue, then it's not just informational. It's not just telling you statistical information or things like that. It's like an opinion piece, if you will, and that it's advocating for a certain position. So, and because of your experience, I understand you were a prior city administrator, so I'm sure you've seen where there's a difference between information and advocacy. So as long as it's purely informational, then I don't see an issue with it. But if you are asking for the article to be circulated, and that article has opinion, let's call it opinion or position statements in it, then that's kind of a backdoor way of advocating for a position. And you can make that advocacy, if you agree with it, at your meeting when we're all here, when you're all here. But that shouldn't be done through emails offline.
Okay.
Can I just follow up on that real quick, though? Now, this raises for me another question. If Doug were to send me, or the group, an article about King Charles's community, I think it's called Poundstone or something, I just want to tell you, I would have no idea whether he supports that article or not. And I know King Charles's position on architecture very well, but I don't have any idea what Doug's position on that is. So I'm a little confused how he could possibly be advocating, even if it is an opinion piece.
Well, because the implication is that he's circulating it because he's either in support of that position, because that's why he wants you to know about it, or he may be in support of that position. So I think the issue is why go there? I mean, there's an easy solution here, which is that if it's an opinion piece and he wants to express that opinion, remember the guidepost. The public needs to know. So if Doug wants to bring that up during a meeting, or send it to Brandon and ask him to include it in the agenda packet, that can all be done, again, because the public knows all about that, and then you all are talking about it here and not through your emails.
So maybe here's a suggestion logistically, because again, we talked today, you weren't here for I don't think you heard this, but we really want to dig in a little deeper onto the scholarship behind what we're doing, which will require probably a lot more reading than we've been doing so far, and a lot more sharing of information without comment or discussion. Possibly the way around it, but you tell me if this is kosher, would be to have a webpage that is open to the public, where they can see our readings, what we're reading.
Well, the answer to that is you can do that. That's not enough, because the Brown Act requires it to be in the agenda, and if there's an article, for example, which is the example you're using, just put that article into the agenda packet, because somebody who is following your meetings, they might not be looking at your website. They may be thinking, okay, the Brown Act says they got to post an agenda if they're going to be addressing an issue. And if you all are reading stuff and getting information from these sources, the public's entitled to know what you know.
For sure.
And maybe comment on it. So my advice on these articles, to use that as our example, if you got an article and you want to have it as a topic of discussion, send it to Brandon and ask him to include it in your agenda packet as a discussion item. So include as discussion items, the attached article, or any one of you could write up a memo or whatever it is, but don't send it to each other. Send it to Brandon, and then Brandon will put it with the agenda packet, and then all of you will see it at the same time the public sees it.
Gosh, I guess that begs another question, which is that Brandon rightfully has already stated today that the increased appetite for meetings from this group is going to be very difficult for the staff to handle. So are there, and we can talk about this later if we like, Brian, but I'm just curious if there are any other technological solutions in which we can post agenda items or anything else so that we do not burden the staff with what will be research that probably needs to be done in advance of the posting of the agenda.
Well, you all can do that research individually. I would discourage you from sharing it with each other. My advice is that if, like I said before, the public is entitled to know what you know, because what goes into your brain may go into your thought process when you're making a decision. So I'm sympathetic to what you say Brandon's situation is, but as long as this committee is in operation, my advice is do not send emails to each other, do not send articles to each other offline. If you want a piece of information to be shared with the group, send it to Brandon. He can incorporate it into an agenda, and it can be on a future agenda item. Because as I say, the public's entitled to know what your information is that you're relying on.
Okay, thank you very much for that advice, Attorney Purick.
Okay.
Any other follow-up thoughts on that? Okay, then I think.
Madam Chair, before you adjourn,
please.
could I have just 2 minutes of your guys' time?
Yes, go for it.
So I'm sorry. Sometimes it takes me a little while to collect my thoughts on things earlier. So I just want to go just backwards a little bit to talk about the strategy paper. And again, apologize. There certainly was no intention for omission of anything. I guess, if the request from the committee is for better and more open communication, I would request that back the other way. I think, thinking back through, the strategy paper is the same one that was put out to the public for the community meeting, the planning commission, and the city council, all of which were publicly noticed and sent out ahead of time. So I don't know if you didn't feel comfortable, but I would ask in the future, if you feel comfortable, just pick up the phone and call me and let me know. So for example, Melanie, if when you saw it the first time when we went to the community meeting or to the planning commission, if you saw something that was missing, we could have maybe changed direction then rather than a month and a half later. Because it's a little deflating, to be honest. It's the first time hearing that you guys think the strategy paper didn't capture your comments, so I didn't really have a response right away, but I've been thinking about that. I mean, I feel badly, and it's a little deflating that we've gone a month and a half without knowing that you felt that way, and we're farther down the road than maybe we should or could have been. So please feel free to reach out to me directly and ahead of time if you feel like something's missing, so we can try to right the ship rather than spending time and efforts for a month and a half working on these. So again, none of it was intentional, but please feel, if you want more communication, please, it's a two-way street. Please do reach out to me.
Okay. I didn't think anything nefarious was going on,
Okay.
and the timing issue was my issue. And I didn't get to look at the paper until last night. So it had
Okay.
nothing to do with you, had nothing to do with what went to council before. My opportunity to look at it was last night in preparation for today's meeting. So that burden's on me.
Okay. Okay. So you didn't get a chance to look at it before the community meeting or the planning commission or the city
I
council?
didn't look at it.
Okay.
Till
Okay.
I ran it off Tuesday before the council meeting, and I didn't get a chance to look at it
Okay.
until
And
last night.
Brandon, from my point of view, I just want you to know that I read my copy on the plane flight home. So I didn't have, the opportunity to read it earlier
Mhm.
either. So, I don't want you to think that anything that I said today made it sound like, that you deliberately did something
Yeah.
that we didn't approve of or
Mhm.
discuss or whatnot. That's not the case.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I believe you, and I feel badly. And again, I'm just, I appreciate the feedback, and I can take it that, we need to give you, get you more involved in things and communicate more. But I just do ask that's a two-way street. The example of a month and a half going by without reading the strategy paper that went to all those public bodies. I would hope that the steering committee in the future would find the time to review those documents earlier rather than, a month and a half later.
Yeah, and I didn't, quite honestly, I want you to know that I didn't understand that the strategy paper was going to be the big deal at that city council or planning commission meeting.
Mhm.
And so I just didn't look at it until, I was on the plane flight home the other night. And then when I looked at it, and then when I got home and I realized that, oh, this is what the meetings were about. Well, that's my, my comment to you that I want you to understand.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I don't want to belabor this. I really value this committee, and I know we're gonna get a lot of really good products out of this. I just, like I said, sometimes it takes me a minute to collect my thoughts when something catches me off guard. So I just wanted to share my thoughts on it, and I definitely hear what you all said too, and we'll make sure that there's
Please don't worry about it.
Yeah.
We've discussed it. It's just now we know, and we move on.
We move on. I like that.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you
Okay.
for that indulgence.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Thank you,
very much
Attorney
for
Buick.
coming.
Thank
Thanks, Brian.
everybody. Thanks for the participation. And thank you, hello, and we're adjourned.